you and I have spoken a few times, and it was great, honestly, how, you and I came together. We were bonding over something that the effective altruism leader, I what's his name again?
McCaskill.
McCaskill. Yeah, McCaskill is making a comment about just the future, guaranteed future well-being of humanity being something he was sort of attached to.
Right.
His personal well-being was attached to that, and you and I were just kind of raising an eyebrow and discussing that together. And
Yeah.
as our discussion unfolded, we found a lot of mutual interests. So here we are, and it's always a pleasure to chat with you. But in having these discussions, you've shared a lot, bits and pieces of your story, which I find really interesting. And I think you and I both hope not just your story, but in general, people find these discussions somewhat helpful, and
Yeah.
that's sort of the motivation here. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad I didn't bore you to tears.
no, no, not it's eye of the beholder or ears of the beholder, I suppose. But it's a lot of cool stuff in here as far as I'm concerned. So put together questions. This just a very quick context to the website selfinvestigation.org. It's more or less the simplest way to put it is, who am I? That's an inquiry. It's a very common inquiry. You can take that question all sorts of directions.
Hmm.
Many of them are, they're not the same directions, but they're not wrong either. You can drive that down that road in a few different
Yeah.
capacities.
Works
Um,
on many levels.
yep, yep. So the first question, and self investigation is not necessarily synonymous with quote unquote waking up, although it can sort
Can
of
be. Yeah.
overlap.
Right.
So I guess what I'll throw at you, maybe before asking you when it started for you, it's just like, how did your relationship with self investigation slash waking up sort of start to percolate?
No, my
And
first memory was of it was a family photo of my dad holding me as a baby and my mom sitting next to him on a couch, and it was my grandmother, my mom's mom, that took a picture of us. And I was so young, I didn't even know what a camera was, but it was this crazy, vivid kind of like a dream sequence of a memory that just sort of was floating around in my brain for many years. And I think I had to be elementary school sometime, or maybe just outside of it. I came across a photo album, and my mom collected a fair bit of photos, family photos, and I just randomly flipped open this one album, and the first picture that popped out of me, I realized it was me, and I was a baby, and it was my dad holding me, and it was the exact scene, but from my grandmother's point of view. I only then figured out. And that was pretty high tech for my family back in the day, to actually have prints. Um, we didn't have hardly any money, so when we did have pictures, very often they were slides, which is something I bet most generation, the younger generations probably don't even know what those are. But then, with the advent of the 21st century, my mom took to scanning and digitizing these photos, both slides and prints. And then some of the originals were lost. And so she hasn't come across it yet. I asked her about it because I'm going off of two memories now. It would be great to see that picture again. But yeah, that I wasn't a year old in that picture. So pretty weird.
mhm.
Yeah, self-investigation. There were events from childhood. The very briefest.
Just very quickly, so that photo though, that was sort of something that jostled something in your
Well,
mind,
yes,
or
in that when I saw the photo itself, I could remember looking at the camera as the picture was being taken, even though I didn't know what a camera was or what was happening,
mhm, mhm.
then to see the photo on the other side. And so it's like yeah, there's a face there that I didn't
Mhm.
recognize,
Got
which
it.
would be
Yes.
mine.
Mhm.
Um, pretty bizarre. And yeah, in
Yeah,
childhood.
pretty bizarre, and eventually just becomes like normal, right? And you almost forget
Yeah,
about it.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
totally bizarre if you can try to imagine what that's like doing for the first time.
yeah, yeah. And so as a young lad, sometime between the ages of 3 and 4, I came to realize what mortality meant and death. The specter of death suddenly became very real. That was quite alarming. And my parents were devout Christian folk, and I took that new urgent fear to my mom, and she addressed it immediately with the good Bible believing Christian approach of basically, to put it bluntly, indoctrinating me and leading me even through the sinner's prayer at that point. And that began my spiritual journey, religious and spiritual. But it was more like 6 or 7 was the next key moment in kind of this deeper realization of what existence is, when it was just a random grocery shopping trip my mom took me on. And I was just sitting in the car in a grocery store parking lot, and there's people milling around just doing their normal grocery store errand type activities. And as I just sat there idly watching, it suddenly dawned on me that every single one of them experienced their own world the way I experienced my own world from that subjective first person viewpoint. I think Richard Langs and Douglas Harding described it as the difference between seeing a face and being a face. And yeah, for whatever reason, prior to that, I just kind of looked at people as if they were kind of objects in a sense. And then I realized they're not just objects, they're actually their own center of their own universe.
Mm.
And I failed to connect the dots that I was appearing in their universe the way that they were appearing in mine. But still, it was a pretty significant realization at a young age, and multiple incidents after that. I don't know where you want to go with it.
Yeah, so that sounds like the early seeds of it planted,
Yeah.
just the curiosity, like the dim
Yeah.
awareness was sort of built there. And
Yeah.
then this might intersect with a few questions here, but when did that sort of progress toward more deliberate questioning? Um, it,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Don't want to carry on too much
mm,
about it, but yeah, I was raised in, I would characterize it now as fundamentalist terms. I was actually intentionally raised to be a young earth creationist, for instance. And I, not just a little bit, not just casually, like books and tape series and seminars and blah, blah, blah. And so by the time I was a teenager, I thought I knew all these arguments about how evolution was a lie and how the earth really was 6,000 years old, and could argue for hours at it. And so I did. And to my surprise as a teenager, no one ever bought it that I
mm.
argued with.
And
And I,
remind me how, because you were based, and you mentioned sort of indoctrinated, and then you had all these answers sort of installed in your mind, and
right.
they were rehearsed. And when you said no one was buying it, where were you running into people and sort of offering this? Uh,
Oh, just school,
yeah, got it. Yep.
friends of friends,
Hmm. Hmm.
friends, cousins,
Yep. Yep.
whatever. Just
Sure.
people who are interested in arguing about it, and
Hmm.
these
Hmm.
are friendly arguments, not actual fighting. But it's like I really did think I had information that people really didn't have, and they
Hmm.
needed to know it because they're deluding themselves. And I
Hmm.
was completely ineffectual. I thought I had some knockdown
Hmm.
arguments, and nobody bought it.
Hmm.
So after just failing to convince people, I kind of got tired of trying. And so I just went on about my life and the normal teenage life, if you will. I like to think that I graduated when I gave up that argumentative uh, approach. I graduated from fundamentalism to evangelical Christianity, and just sort of, let faith and religion be what they were in my own life, and not make it a big deal as far as interpersonal relationships went. So I just proceeded through junior high, high school, into college, worked on my engineering degree. And then after that, I was trying to start a career. And it was not until I had graduated, got my degree, and started my career. It took about a year, year and a half or something to really get comfortable setting up that career. And finally, for the first time since I was a teenager, I had enough bandwidth, mental
Mm.
bandwidth available. And the this would have been about 2000 or 2001, back when the internet was for fun. And, and I stumbled across this website that was actually a reflection of an old Usenet group. And Alt Origins, I think it was the name, and it was supposed to chronicle the debate between creationism and evolution. And when I stumbled on that website, I was like, oh yeah, I actually got an engineering degree, and between high school and my degree, I had literally one semester of biology, one, and it was in high school. And I remember that how our teacher sheepishly had one lecture on evolution, basically predicated it on saying, look, that just I'm going to tell you what you need to know to pass the test. Don't
Mm.
make anything of it other than that. And I didn't.
Mm.
So anyway, I was suddenly intrigued because I've always been fascinated by science. I just went down different avenues of inquiry and more on the physics and chemistry side of things than biology. So I suddenly had free mental bandwidth, and got to jump in. Like, yay, let's get into this, because
Hmm.
again, I thought I had a pretty good handle on it, and it was, I think, about a 2 month deep dive to go through all of the material on the evolutionist side of the debate. And it blew my mind. Like, all of what I thought were counter arguments, they blew them out of the water. And by the end of that 2 months, I came out convinced evolution by natural selection was a scientific fact. And it's like, oh, but I'm also a devout Christian who was,
Mm.
inerrant, blah, 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 believer in all these things. And suddenly it's incompatible.
Mm.
There's knowledge out there that's incompatible with my beliefs.
Yep.
And so I didn't know what to do with that. And that began my inquiry into the nature of my faith, which was the center of my universe. It was the center of my morality, my worldview. So politics built off that, social relationships built off of it. It was central. And now I had an incompatibility right
Mm.
at the core of it, and that needed to be addressed. So I wasn't inquiring into the nature of myself per se, but it was the nature of my worldview
Hmm.
and my philosophy, bedrock as far as I knew at the time. And that actually was like a pebble that started what would become an avalanche. And it was an 11-year investigation into my own faith. And my approach was that, oh, I worded it much better when I wrote you the answer. I forgot
No,
now.
this is excellent. I mean,
Like, like,
because
right.
I mean, just to sort of put a little pause in here, because
Sure.
what you've described is, um, because what we're trying to get to is, when did this become a deliberate inquiry? We talked
Yeah.
about when seeds were planted when you were young, and
Mhm.
then what's kind of interesting is we're all so absorbed in the life that's immediately in front of us. You mentioned finding or happening upon more bandwidth, and I
Yeah.
think that's so much of a common trigger for people. People can do a
Yeah.
lot with bandwidth, right? They can entertain themselves mindlessly,
Hmm.
and that doesn't, maybe they're happy doing that, and that's what it is. But other people take that capacity and sort of aim it in a way you did, and all
Yeah.
of a sudden these big questions start sprouting up. And
Don't get
it's
me wrong, I goofed off. I did a
yeah,
lot of
yeah,
that.
not gotcha. Yeah,
But
as
yeah,
everybody
I
should.
did both. I had my cake and eated it too. I
Yep.
goofed off and I did this deep dive into
Hmm.
inquiry.
Hmm. Hmm.
But yes, you're right. Daily life, when you're nose to the grindstone, it may not be possible to
Yeah,
do inquiry.
you
That's for sure.
one needs a moment to start asking questions,
Yeah.
and then they sort of stick.
Yeah.
And then as you in your case, you were mentioning just the scientific fact of evolution was one splinter that was
Yep.
hard to just take out. That and
Oh, I couldn't take it out.
yeah.
This is I don't want to get sidetracked by a free will discussion. Do you think I wanted to undermine my worldview? No, but the
Right.
argument was airtight.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so, yeah, it was like I can't remember where the phrase came from, a splinter in the mind. Maybe it was the Matrix or something.
Hmm. Hmm.
But yeah, it was like, okay, something's got to give.
Hmm.
Now, either I could be intellectually dishonest and embrace cognitive dissonance.
Hmm.
But no, as soon as I became aware of what cognitive dissonance was, it was like anathema to me. I could not stand one bit of it whatsoever. So something had to give. And I decided it was my faith
Hmm.
that needed to be reformed in light of knowledge. And so, yeah, that launched an 11-year inquiry into my faith, which would I kept. It's I don't want to call it a house of cards because it didn't collapse the way a house of cards was. It's like a chink in the armor,
Hmm.
and you keep hitting away at it, and you think you resolve one thing, and then something else cracks.
Mm.
So you go and you work on that, and you think you come to grips with it, and then something else gives way,
Yeah.
and that process continued for 11 years, and then there was a culminating event that yeah, it had to go. It just there was no way I could maintain intellectual honesty and
Yes.
integrity and hold on to what I believed.
So
So
now we
belief,
have sort of two milestones. One
yeah,
as a you had those seeds planted when you were young, and then you had this free time, and you had this cognitive dissonance you had to resolve, and you've alluded to that was an 11-year process. So maybe you can start talking about that process and the journey, because
yeah,
just imagine being you or anyone in that situation. You have something to resolve, and you need some knowledge, call it knowledge experience, to resolve it. Where do you start?
right.
Where do you even start looking or asking?
Well, right. During those 11 years, I thought some part of my Christian faith was true. Has had to be
Hmm.
because I didn't know anything else. And then by the end, when I finally had to call it quits and renounced it all, again, that was the center point of everything. My sense of self-identity, the center of my worldview, center of morality, etc. And we're talking ontological type identity. What was I? And the in Christianity, and I guess it would be Judaism as well, the phrase, well, excuse me, Imago Dei would be Latin, so I don't think Jewish people would use Imago Dei, but that image of God um, is really key in Christian traditions, and that was what I thought humanity was, and now it's like new, and so it's like, oh God, really? Like, what am I then? That was
Mm.
I didn't know what I was. I didn't know what reality was. And so that was where the inquiry really sharpened focus, was at that point of renouncing faith.
Yeah, that's so now another milestone is you've formulated a sharp question,
Yeah,
and you didn't yet maybe have the tools to answer that question, or know how to sort of get a foothold on it, but you at least had the question formulated.
right.
So then what
What the hell
happened?
is going on? That was the
Yes.
question.
Yep. Who am I? What the hell is going on? So then what?
Then what? Oh, well, it, it was funny as I went through that 11-year process of reforming my faith. I had a friend who was a pastor, a minister, and he was seminary trained. He was a fan of philosophy. He studied all the Christian mystics. And every time I came up to him and confided that, you know what, I think evolution is true. And he's like, that's all right, man. I do too. Oh,
Mm,
okay. Well, how do we deal with this? And, he'd give me some reading recommendations or we'd have conversations. And this happened kind of at each of those junctures. For example, I was raised to think homosexuality was profoundly evil, for instance, an abomination. Thankfully, even though I would characterize that upbringing as fundamentalist, there was never like any real like kind of militant or animus directed at people per se,
mhm,
but very much intellectually and emotionally it was kind of a revolting thing
mhm,
in my upbringing. And so, wrestled with that and like learned, oh, some of my friends are gay and what the hell do you do with that? And then, finding stories about gay Christian people and what are their lives like?
mhm,
And it really forced my mind open. And it came to the point where I had to conclude love is love. And, I talk with my friend about this stuff and we have all kinds of fun conversations. And towards the end of that process, just life pulled us in different directions. I hadn't spoken with him in a couple of years. So when the final nail had been placed in the coffin of my faith, I reached out to him simply under the guise of like, hey, let's go get a beer. Let's catch up. And I didn't tell him, what was on my mind. I didn't think I needed to. We liked, just shooting the breeze and drinking beer. So we got together for the first time in a couple of years. And I asked him, so how are you doing? What's new with you? And he just said, well, I'm an atheist.
mm,
And I basically almost did a spit take with my beer, and I blurted out, "You too,"
mm,
and we busted up laughing. Um, so the next question out of my mouth was, "Aren't you still a minister?" And he's like, "Yeah."
mm,
Oh, well, that's great. So he was in a bit of a quandary too.
mm,
And so we talked, and I just asked, well, how are you making sense of this? I'm completely unmoored. I don't know which way's up. How do I define morality? What makes us tick? And so I just asked him, where are you finding either comfort or interest or helping you navigate? And he just said Buddhist meditation and the Tao Te Ching.
mm,
And I'm like, I've heard of them. So we finished that conversation and I went, it was like 2 blocks from the library. So I went to the library and got like I think it was half a dozen translations of Tao Te Ching and several books on like Buddhism for Dummies and a few others as well. And one of them was a compilation of meditation techniques. And I'd never tried meditating. I'd only heard of it, but I didn't know what it was. And this little book had, I think, 6 different teachers from different traditions wrote a brief essay about each style. And then it came with a CD that you could pop in, and it was a guided meditation by each of those 6 people. Or maybe it was more than 6. I can't quite remember. So, anyway, that was my first exposure to meditation. And I'll admit, I read all the books on Buddhism. It didn't make any sense.
mhm,
But I just, well, let's jump in with the
mhm,
meditation. And on that, there was a Shikantaza session by Edward S.B. Brown of the San Francisco Zen Center. And there was one of Vipassana in the Mahasi Sayadaw tradition, uh, but I've forgotten who wrote and led that one. Larry Rosenberg, maybe. Anyway, so those were the ones that really jumped out at me. And so I listened to him a couple of times, read it a couple of times, and then, took the training wheels off and just sat for the first
mhm,
time. And it could not have been more than the third time I did that. I had what I guess you'd call it a vision. And it was profoundly powerful. It didn't answer any of my questions, but it was exactly what I needed to experience to tell me I was on the right track, that this was the kind of investigation that needed to happen if I was to have any hope of getting to the bottom of things. And I can't explain why or how that happened. But yeah, this is all in a very short period, like a week, maybe. And I was so blown away by what that experience that I just jumped right in and I just
Hmm.
started meditating, even though I didn't know why I was doing it. It just seemed like the right thing to do.
Mm.
And so, dumb luck does seem to have a big part of the spiritual journey as well.
Yeah. Because even just knowing, I've kind of anecdotally hear this pretty often. People might find meditation for a variety of reasons. Could be sort of random, or the what they want out of it could range, and it's non-obvious like why it's even helpful, or some people just really don't like it. It could be very boring, and in your sounds like in your um, situation, it sort of was immediately valuable. Maybe you didn't
Yeah.
know exactly why, but you felt something from it.
Exactly. It was a very visceral, very real experience. And I don't know if we'll get into the psychedelics angle of things. I mean, I'll just spill the beans that I don't
Sure,
have
sure.
any experience with them.
Hmm. Hmm.
And although part of why I was a devout Christian was I had, contact with the divine, or so I thought at the time. I later figured out I was just in conversation with myself. It was myself at different layers, if you will.
Hmm.
And there was, a higher intelligence than the mere regular person brain at work, which shouldn't be surprising.
Mm.
I mistook it to be the voice of divinity. I guess arguably you could say it was, but it wasn't other than me. I
Hmm.
just wasn't the me I took myself to be. And so that
Hmm.
was interpreted in light of my faith. And so I took it to be, Yahweh, basically. Um, but those were really profound, moving experiences. And I had many of them over the course of my life. And that was part of my faith. So here I stumbled onto something completely outside the context of any religion. And it was one of the most impactful things that ever happened to me. Like I said, it didn't provide any real answers, but like I said, it was the perfect indicator that I was on the right path, and the vividness and the
Mm.
visceral nature of it. I've had many other experiences meditating after that. And while I've never had experience with psychedelics, I hear stories from friends that have done it. I've seen documentaries or read books, and some of those accounts of psychedelic experiences very much line up with what I've experienced just doing nothing more than meditation.
Hmm.
So I don't know what to make of it.
Yeah,
Other
yeah.
than,
But it's very hard to ignore, certainly, when you
yes,
discover that, because it's just
it would have been like me.
uncomparable to anything. You have no real benchmark for that sort of thing, right?
Right. It would have been like when I came to realize that there was a problem between my faith and my knowledge now of what's understood in scientific inquiry, like if I had thrown the science out. So, and just because I didn't want to upset the apple cart. And so, here was a profound experience, and I suppose you could throw it away, but I was already, I kept using the word unmoored. I had
Hmm.
nothing. And then now there was not nothing. There was something, even if
Hmm.
I didn't understand it. So that's kind of what launched me into the post religious, but still spiritual, if we can use the word,
Hmm. Hmm.
uh, inquiry. And yeah, I was trying to then, at that point, get to the, if you will, the bottom of what reality was. And that would, in not too uh, in somewhat short order, would dovetail immediately into the question, who am I, or what
Hmm.
am I?
Hmm.
That's on how you like the wording. But yeah, the inquiry into the nature of reality and the nature of the self, they're kind of the same.
Yes, absolutely. It's fun following you through these milestones because you had the childhood experience, and then when you had free time, you discovered cognitive dissonance, and then you had the you sort of said, well, I may as well consider myself an atheist at this point because I've learned a sufficient amount of science to sort of
Yeah.
refute a sufficient amount of what I previously had in my head. And then you actually met your friend who was simultaneously going through the same process.
Yeah.
Then you went to the library, grabbed an armful of books about meditation, a feature of which was meditation.
Hmm.
There was Buddhism, books about Buddhism, and then a feature as meditation. And then you try meditation, and you happen upon these very interesting, compelling experiences that don't come from any outside place. It's not like someone
Right.
gave that to you. This was a discovery on the inside.
Yeah.
So and then but and the journey goes on because as you
Yeah.
mentioned, then it's like, well, what is this, and how can I get to the bottom of it?
Hmm.
So then take us to the next steps. Like how yet again we're left with the question: what next? What now?
Right. Well, I didn't know, and I never, ever, ever would think to prescribe a practice for people or a line of inquiry or approach directly. Anytime I have conversations like this with people, I very much want to know who they are. Where do they come from? What are they looking for? What do they see as problems? And come up with just a conversation
Mm-hmm.
as friends to try to help them make sense of what they're doing. And I've spent a lot of time in my life barking up wrong trees. And I look at any role I might play as probably more just being a friendly encouragement to not waste your time,
Mm-hmm.
but never to say that this is how it should be looked at.
Mm-hmm.
And sorry to offer that as a preamble because what's next it got crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So 1 year after like I said, I renounced my faith. I probably met this friend with, I don't even want to say weeks. Maybe it was a couple, 3 weeks. I don't think it would have been a month or more. And then within 1 week of that, I had this experience, and that boom gave me all the encouragement and impetus I needed to jump in the deep end without even knowing what I was doing. And then within 1 year, I was getting divorced. And so my ex and I had been together for 17 years at that point. It was a huge deal and very painful. I would think it was as friendly, amicable divorce as one could hope for, but that doesn't mean it isn't painful. And so I was pretty distraught at times. And the meditation, I was now about a year in on it. It was very helpful just from a decompression standpoint. Like emotions and feelings can storm and ebb and flow way faster and more powerfully than your rational thought can keep up with it. So it was a means of just finding calm amidst the storm. And I journaled my brains out.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very painful and tumultuous process. I was just trying to hang on, really, keep the career going, so on and so forth. And the just so happened that while I was sitting, and I was meditating a lot, mind you, because I
Mm-hmm.
was in a lot of pain, and so I'd spend a lot of my free time just doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and just keeping things together, staying sane.
And this is
And, yeah.
um, these are sort of self-guided meditations. Like
Yes.
once you got, it sounded like those initial meditations you found at the library kindled your own
Ex
meditation practice.
exactly.
Mhm.
In the Mahasi Sayadaw tradition of Vipassana, they really kind of have a focus on the breath, and it really is great for just staying focused and working on the discipline of concentration, really. And can you keep attention focused? And when attention wavers from the object of meditation, which could be breath or something else, but having that kind of meta awareness to know attention's drifted, what is it drifted towards, acknowledge that, and come back to the
Mm-hmm.
practice. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a fairly regimented practice. And then, of course, from that, there's a tradition that goes along with it. How do you work with it? What path do you walk with that tool on, and how do you go through development with it? I didn't run with any of that. I just, and for good or ill, but it worked for me. I
Hmm.
just needed the basis of getting familiar with the movement of my mind,
Yes.
with how attention behaves. It can be controlled, but it also does its own thing. So getting used to that, and then the Soto version of Shikantaza that Edward S.B. Brown talked about, and then I stumbled across a book by his mentor Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, who founded the center, and they compiled a bunch of his talks into a book called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. Just a gorgeous book. I don't know if you've read it.
No.
Oh, it's yeah. If it interests you,
Hmm.
Zen interests you in the slightest, it's a fantastic book. And he talks a lot about just sitting, having the zazen of a frog. He'd often talk about when a frog sits, it just sits,
Hmm.
unless it needs to do something else, and then it does that. And it's a very lighthearted. Um, I hate sincere. That's it. We'll use another Alan Watts distinction: sincere versus serious. It's a sincere practice, but not necessarily serious.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, and there is a wonderful flavor that comes out of that. But it was very much just sitting. He talked about how the sitting itself is expressing the Buddha nature. And I didn't know what that meant,
Hmm. Hmm.
but it sounded good and it made me feel good. So I did that.
Hmm.
So the relaxed attitude I got from that book in particular, I think Rinzai traditions would very much frown upon that approach to shikantaza. But for me, that was kind of how I started putting my feet in that particular pond. And there was some other uh, reading I was doing on the side that was talking about, um, you could call it subconscious, but I think it was Watts again. You can
Hmm.
tell I've spent some time listening to the guy and reading him, referred to it sometimes as preconscious. And I think I like that better than subconscious, preconscious. But that whole power of the mind and that lies underneath discursive thought, it's unspeakably powerful. And we make ourselves kind of crazy when we try to brute force think our way through problems. Um, I started experimenting with it actually, where I had a lot of problems at the time, and so I just kind of think about the problem and then just let it go and meditate and just let everything be, not hoping that I could ever think of solutions to my problems, but letting, if there is a solution, just letting it be presented. And it's that pre-conscious intelligence or subconscious intelligence
Hmm.
that's going to wrestle with it and do the
Hmm.
do the heavy lifting. And so I did a lot of experiments, and it ended up working quite well, where I could just sit and try not to worry about a problem. And if you do worry about a problem, don't worry about worrying about a problem. Just being with things and letting that more primordial intelligence wrestle with it. And that gave me guidance, actually, that helped me through a lot of stuff. So I had a very non-traditional meditation practice. It was basically therapy
Hmm. Hmm.
for me. And lo and behold, I guess I kind of say I started psychoanalyzing myself inadvertently
Hmm.
in these sits out of nowhere. I
You
just
almost can't help it, right? It almost just starts happening
Yeah,
automatically.
it
Once
did,
you
it was
orient to the
automatic.
mind, then you're.
Yeah, I'm relaxing with the mind as it is. And then out of nowhere, I'd get presented with a memory. I've told you about some of my young memories and all kinds of stuff I'd never, ever, like, I didn't remember, but suddenly I remembered them. And every time it happened, it was very salient on my life, on the person that I thought I was.
Mm.
This episode would suddenly come back to light, and I'd see these connections and saliencies that I was totally unaware of, and realize, well, this is impacting who I think I am and how I'm interacting with the world. How crazy is that? And that became a lot of journal fodder as well. And it just, that process became, again, the question we were asking earlier, who am I?
Mm-hmm.
This was very much to that point, but I wasn't actually overly concerned about the question. It became really just, I was fascinated by this process of the
Yes.
mind working with itself. Like,
Yeah. Like
how does that even happen?
you I'm
And
sure.
so,
I'm sure
yeah,
everybody, even we're talking. We're not talking directly about spirituality
right.
necessarily, but of course it comes up, and we're also talking about psychology. We're talking about
Yep.
the brain,
Yep.
and I think everybody, regardless of which angle you're coming at this from, can relate to resolution just appearing
Yeah.
on its own. Um, you, and you were saying before, you can't brute force that. You can't will that stuff into happening.
I didn't
And
even know it was like on the menu.
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
those are the most, and I can relate to that certainly too. I mean, those are the most powerful moments when you didn't even know about some of this resolution or experience that it was
yeah.
possible, and it just shows up.
It just shows up. And again, it's like, well, what do you do with that?
Mm. Yes,
Uh,
that's the question that keeps you going.
It does. It does. For me, again, even though at the time it started in just coping with pain, but it grew. Eventually, that problem just worked itself out. Divorces happen and
Hmm.
life goes on.
Hmm.
But this, I don't know. I don't even know what you call it. Self-revelation, whatever. It just became really, really, really interesting.
Hmm.
It's like learning what made me tick.
And I'm
I,
guessing there was sort of a series of these, right,
oh yes,
occurring.
yeah.
Yes.
And it just kept going and going and
Hmm.
going and going. And the more it happened, just the more fascinated I became that this could even happen. But also, it's like getting to know yourself.
Mm.
Some rooms are really dark and disturbing, but then when you actually look at them plainly, and then you can see the reverberations that those experiences had in your life,
Mm.
but maybe you didn't even know they were there. And then once you do know they're there, you can, well, what do you do with them? For me, it's just I embraced it all.
Hmm.
Whatever came up, it's like, oh yeah, that did happen. Oh
Mm.
yeah, that really sucked.
Mm.
That was so painful. But then I can't explain why. I know there's a lot of time spent in mindfulness and vipassana about not being judgmental
Mm.
things. And I wasn't trying to, have a specific practice like that. It was really more, but it did work out that way because
Yeah.
I was motivated more by curiosity than
Hmm.
anything else.
Yeah. One thing you've mentioned a couple times is there's no like recipe to do any of this.
Yeah.
It occurs. It seems to, at least, to occur, and for everybody in different orders and different ways.
Yeah.
Maybe different strengths in terms of how all this stuff clicks or not. Um, but I can relate to what you're saying, where there, like you mentioned, there is the explicitly defined meditation practice where you see everything non-judgmentally.
Hmm.
That's an encouraged practice. But on the other hand, that might just come about on its own. And it seemed like
Yeah.
it did in your case.
Yeah, because some things that came up were painful, but
Hmm.
then again, it was realizing, well, if that actually happened, and it did, it's like, oh, I didn't know what to do with it other than like, well, it happened.
Hmm.
It's not happening now.
Yeah. Yep.
And so it's like there's no need to worry about it because it's not happening now.
Hmm.
It just was one of those things. And then now that it was brought forth in living memory, it was like, oh, I can see how there was a reactivity maybe birthed from that painful experience. But now that I remember the experience for what it was, it's like you don't have to react to it.
Hmm.
It's just, it's kind of there. And in a way, it loses its power.
Yeah.
Uh, so, yeah. Anyway,
And
I
this,
don't know how,
what comes to mind is, a lot of times this is almost too pithy to be helpful to people. It's like it's all about the now and staying in the now, and the past isn't real, and the future isn't real. It's like present moment, and
yeah,
that sounds lovely, but
yeah,
really we all have these memories. They show up, especially if you're sitting in meditation and it's just allowing them to show up. And when you say focus on the now, it's I think the wrong way to take that would be just don't worry about your memories, because in your case, look how helpful that process is. You're recognizing these past experiences and you're seeing the domino effect they have,
yeah,
and
yeah,
then in that process, they lose their power, as you say,
yeah.
on a moving forward basis.
Right, right. And I don't know, should I get to a punchline? I've been kind of yammering for a
Sure.
bit here. But
Well, let's just, I keep sort of replacing us in your journey. So
yeah,
we've gone from, it was a tumultuous time. The divorce is one element, but also just the fact that your armor or your identity was starting to sort of rebuild and reconstruct itself.
yeah,
So of course that's even independent of divorce, that's just a wild time. So it sounds
it's
like
totally
there
roller
was
coaster.
there was a period where you were just observing that. And
Yeah,
as you say, you were just kind of along for the ride. You weren't willing this stuff. You were just sitting like the frog and watching this stuff come up and just sort of uh, integrating it, or just
yeah.
appreciating it. So then what happened?
Well, that process culminated.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've talked about, visions and the experiences that might sound like something somebody experiences on psychedelics. So there was a very notable one, and this is only a year and a half after I started meditating at all, but this revelation of personal history and memory, and the dominoes you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
It was funny how it almost it's pithy to say, yes, now is all there is. The past doesn't exist. The future doesn't exist. I'd never heard anyone say that.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I was seeing that the past is a memory,
Mm-hmm.
and that does not have to impact the present. That doesn't impact now. It's just a memory. And this happens hundreds and thousands of times. And then one night, as they say, yeah, I was down for a sit and more of this going on, and it reached a culmination. And it was another vision. And I remember one of my favorite uh, documentaries on DMT, the spirit molecule. I don't know if you've seen that one.
No.
Uh,
Good
uh,
one.
it is pretty good. But I always like listening to people talk about psychedelic trips, and there's a lot of them in that documentary. Anyway, what I went through was just sounds like something that would come out of there, and I would it would take way too long to try to describe it. So the culmination of it was um, all of this memory, this knowledge of the self was seen as a mental construct. And it was nothing more than a conceptual model. I suddenly realized that everything I thought I was as a person was based on a memory, which was a thought. Nothing, nothing but thoughts. That's all. Like my entire being and self that I knew was nothing but thoughts. And that when that realization it hit, it was like a bomb going off in my mind. And the my self-image obliterated, just exploded. an image is like if you've seen the Lord of the Rings movie and what's the Dark Tower, Barad-dûr, when it collapses,
Mm,
it's like that. That's
mm,
what happened, but it was me.
mm,
And then what was left was just pure light. It had no form. You couldn't say anything about it,
mm,
but it was alive. It was energy.
mm,
And I realized like, yeah, that if there's a me, that's it. But
mm,
now that this is where the question really, really came up because I thought I could answer the question, who am I? And I suddenly realized I didn't know.
mm,
I didn't know what I was. I didn't know who I was, but I wasn't nothing. It's not like I didn't exist,
mm,
but everything I knew or thought I knew about me obliterated. And wow. And that was irrevocable. It
mm,
never,
mm,
ever, ever came back. And that was 10 and a half years ago. Um, so it was a bit of a shock. And, when I came out of the vision, I was still sitting on the cushion. It was at this point like midnight or 1 a.m. It was quite a long sit at a strange time. But by that time, I was a bachelor, so I could do whatever the hell I wanted. And yeah, the traffic was going on outside, same as always. My apartment was it was the same. And I had to go to work in a few hours and I didn't know what to do. So I just, well, all right, I'll go to work and see what happens.
yeah, I'll
And,
insert the Buddhist phrase. I think it's Buddhist.
oh,
Chop wood, carry water.
exactly.
What to do when these, you know,
Exactly. I had no idea. So I just went to work and everybody was the same. Everybody treated me the same. Nobody acted any different. I didn't know what I was. I didn't
mhm,
know anything. I was like completely lost. At least I knew how to do the job. So I just did that. But I realized the world didn't care. The world went on just the same. My life, my friends were the same. My family was the same. Everything was the same except me. And that's when the inquiry really began.
mm.
But yeah,
Yeah. So that wasn't where are we in the 11-year journey at this point?
oh,
Was
the
that?
the 11 journey was the 11 years was the Christian journey.
Mhm.
So
Got it. I
yeah,
see.
that ended with me renouncing my faith, and that's when I took up meditation. So this is a
Mhm,
year and a half later.
mhm.
And it would so anyway, I now was
So this is
convinced
the big collapse, right? This
this
is
was the, yeah, you could call it the big
I think
collapse.
you've called it that before.
Yeah, in American conversant spiritual lingo,
Hmm.
I describe it as definitively seeing through the illusion of the self,
Hmm. Hmm.
which is helpful, disorienting, but helpful.
Absolutely. Both.
But it doesn't answer the question.
Mhm.
And so now I was really confused.
And
I
just to
thought I was
very quickly
confused.
pause, I'm trying my best
Sure.
to imagine what this might sound like to anybody
I
listening.
don't know.
And no, I think one thing, it's not like you read about this and started
No,
believing it. It's not
no,
like these ideas were came anywhere really, because
no.
just to sort of paraphrase a lot of what we've talked about, you slowly unraveled yourself,
Yeah,
and again, you didn't even really do that. You were just sort of allowing it to happen. It's not like you were tearing away pieces,
right.
as we might think about. You weren't thinking this, or you weren't denying parts of yourself. You were more or less, a lot of this was with a foundation of meditation. You were just watching these epiphanies sort of bubble up, and
Yeah,
watching these memories lose their power. And then ultimately the big one was seeing the I have to trying my best to pick the right words here, but the concept of self, or the construct of self,
there you go.
was
Yeah,
really built upon thoughts and just
just
fell apart.
yeah.
So
And
now,
yeah, you're right. I had never read about this or heard about this. This, it only after, like I said, this was the beginning of the
mhm,
journey for
yes,
real. The real inquiry,
this stuff
and
just happened. It happened. You
it
you,
just
you weren't
happened.
you weren't trying to make it happen. You didn't read about it, and this stuff was just happening. And
It was
as you
just
say,
happening.
it
Yeah,
started it started the real inquiry.
Yes. And then only once I started on that journey with new intent and new vigor did I suddenly start hearing about these things happening. It's like, oh, this is a thing.
Hmm.
Wow. So yeah, it was very much not sought for at all. And so the only takeaway I had from that was I let my curiosity guide me and just being honest with whatever is revealed. And so when I talk with other people, those are kind of what I hand to them. It's like, let your curiosity guide you, and there's no pressure, no program. But yeah, this is definitely on the menu.
Hmm.
I don't know if it was good or not good that I was unaware of it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, yeah, I think expectations almost cause more problems.
Yes, if I had to, it does feel fortunate have to not be aware of this menu item, to just sort of be surprised by it. Um,
Yeah. Hmm.
yeah, it's a tricky one. But all you can do is think about your own experience, and that was the case for you. This
Yeah.
wasn't on the menu. These things started to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. So it at least can, I try not to lose track of the fact that there is no program prescription, and to not try to think that I can steer someone in the right direction.
Yeah, you and I bond on that. Um, it seems, again, we're alongside our conversation right now are all sorts of existing practices, traditions, ideas, concepts. One of them being an idea that you and I are not particularly fond of, that there is a way to experience these things.
Right.
There's a set of steps you can follow, or a specific practice, or a guru or teacher who has it all figured out. And if only you follow that particular practice, that is the way. And, I think you and I see this as occurring in so many different ways and capacities for, as far as we know, as far as we see in the anecdotes out there.
Yeah.
So it's sort of important to respect that this process there's no right way to do it. And
Exactly. And I mean, I'd even argue there's no wrong way to do it. It's
hmm.
just a question of how circuitous of a journey do you want to take? How
Hmm.
much time and how much energy do you want to expend on the journey? I think there's ways to definitely shortcut it. But like I said, that particular episode was 18 months into a
Hmm.
meditation practice.
Hmm.
And that was the beginning, because at that point I really was convinced I didn't know what reality was, and I didn't know what I was. And that's where, yeah, my real seeking journey began, and it began in earnest at that point. And it'd take another 6.5 years for that to resolve, which is its own story. um, I really appreciate what you're trying to do with the website, and these stories and conversations is a way to contextualize the self investigation and spiritual journey writ large into society, into culture, into global civilization. How can we influence events? Don't want to use that word, right? But how can we make this be a positive thing,
Hmm.
to impact other people's lives and the world? And when you realize that you don't know what you are, that changes the way you interact with the world and other
Yes,
people.
that's beautifully put. I mean, if I could just repeat that, when you realize you don't know who you are, and what was the second part you said?
Oh, that
That
can't
had
help but impact how you
Yes,
interact with others.
yes, right. It's both of those things. It's, so the if we're putting anything out here, it's more just a provocation of curiosity. It's like, do you really know who you are? And once you start asking that question, you eventually realize the answer might be no. And then how, if you do reach that conclusion, how does that affect your life moving forward? not just your life, but anybody you might interact with. We all
Right.
share an apparent world together.
Yeah. And if when I was convinced I didn't know what I was, that was a great motivation for being I hate to say it humble, but it's like literally don't know anything.
Yeah.
Like, how can I soapbox when I'm clueless?
Hmm. Hmm.
So that was helpful.
Yeah, it's a absolutely the humbling power. You and I can't speak for everyone, but I can relate very much to that. It's like if you don't know your own nature, what can you claim to know with any degree of certainty?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, but it doesn't mean you're not curious and
That's
not, but you're now open
mhm.
to, yeah, that was kind of my guiding theme, especially over as the journey continued was, well, now I really don't care what the answer is, like as far as an ontological proposition might be phrased, whatever it is, that's what I wanted. I wanted truth. I wanted reality. I didn't care what it was.
Yeah, it's almost too, I keep, what keeps coming to mind as I'm hearing you speak is, so much of this is not what you are. It's just sort of understanding gradually what you are not.
Yeah.
Like we take ourselves to be any number of things,
Yeah.
and one by one, those can slowly, if one, takes this up, can be picked apart. And
Yeah.
it's really hard to say, to pin that as that is who I am. And
Yeah.
the more attempts you make, the more you sort of knock down as a possible answer.
Right. Netty, netty, netty is
Hmm.
say.
Hmm. So I guess we've this is such a significant event. We've spent a lot of time on it, and I think this is pretty consistent. Is seeing through the illusion of self, and that's sort of established. We can sort of say that and just admit that is
Yeah.
whether you're talking the nice thing about that is you can approach that on the neuroscience
Yeah.
angle, the psychology angle, the Buddhist angle, just the empirical inquiry, self investigation angle.
Yeah.
Self illusion has all those dimensions to it.
Yep.
Um, so
Yeah.
here we are in your journey, and that, as you say, starts your real inquiry.
Right. Sam
Um,
Harris hadn't published Waking Up yet.
mhm, mhm.
I hadn't, it would be another 6 months before I'd even heard of Alan
Yeah, so
Watts.
talk us through that part.
Well, I quit my job in 2 days.
Hmm.
Again, I always try to
Now,
be.
maybe just linger on that for a second. So,
Oh,
was that because your just understanding of everything, was starting to shift so fundamentally that the job, in light of that, was sort of so obviously not what you wanted to be putting your energy toward, or how did that decision come about?
well, you could put it that way, or my certainty and my lack of understanding was becoming painfully salient.
Hmm.
Do we give a shout out to Mike Judge at this point?
Sure, absolutely.
Office Space,
Yep,
man.
yep.
And when I realized that this mental construct itself has been irrevocably torn apart, the question naturally follows, well, what do you do with that?
Hmm.
And so I again was, or you've asked about fiction in some of your questions.
Hmm.
Love Douglas Adams' work, and so I was telling myself, don't panic, go to work, and so I did, and I barely made it through. That was a Monday, and I'm like, come on, try to hold it together. And one unlucky phone call on a Tuesday morning before I had my cup of coffee, and I just life was too short. I knew following the divorce I'd had at least 10 years to go to retirement, and in my field, most of I loved my employer. I had a really good job, but most of my work that I enjoyed, I was doing less and less of it, and about 90% of my work was basically doing compliance paperwork. And, you know, how many TPS reports do you need to fill out,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I really had no plan. I really had no plan. And I don't, I try to always be clear that I do not recommend other people take the course of action I
Mm-hmm.
took or make
Mm-hmm.
the choices I made. But yeah, it was quite simply, I don't think I can do this for another 10 years. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm not going to be doing this. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, I wrote my letter of resignation and gave them 4 weeks and tried to make a graceful exit. And then in a hurry, tried to figure out something to do. And vocational roller coaster aside, that was its own adventure. Um, but that process is its own story. Uh, I just wanted to figure out how can I make my way through life successfully, but not be spending my life energy doing things that I really don't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, all that compliance paperwork, is it really important? I mean, obviously, from a regulatory standpoint, it's important, but like, how do you want to spend your life? And that's the question I was facing. So, full on midlife crisis. Um, I was made a promise to myself a year prior that I wouldn't get divorced and quit my career at the same time, one crisis at a time. And yeah, so a year later, I was like, okay, I guess it's time to quit, and I
Mm-hmm.
did.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Now
but yeah,
that must have afforded you time to take
yeah,
this the next step in inquiry
right.
further. Yeah.
Exactly. So I thought naturally I have some control systems engineering background knowledge. I can become a consultant and I can do essentially the same work, hopefully with a less compliance burden, freelance style. And I did start working on that angle. I picked up a few freelance consulting jobs. Um, and but that meant I set my own work schedule. So yes, very much the inquiry process increased, and I explored all kinds of different things, both vocationally and in the inquiry business. But like I said, it took a while even to get helpful guides along the way of what to look for, and I was still muddling my way along. I really think it was Alan Watts work that when it was 6 months later that someone just said, "Hey, have you ever listened to this guy?" I'm like, "Who's that?" I don't know. And so I just looked up some clips on YouTube of his talks and instantly just it was like, you know,
This guy is talking
oh my
my
God.
language.
It was, and I told you I had been reading back at the beginning of this chapter. I was reading books on Buddhism and just had no idea what they were
Mm-hmm.
talking
Mm-hmm.
about. And after about three of them, I'm like, whatever.
Yeah. It.
I put them down. And
Mm-hmm.
then to hear Alan Watts, one just speaking right to the heart
Mm-hmm.
and to the intellect, it was
Mm-hmm.
amazing. He
Mm-hmm.
really could communicate. But then he started explaining the frameworks of Eastern philosophies and religions in ways that made sense.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly, all that stuff I was utterly confused about started to make sense. And I
Mm-hmm.
realized the deeper levels of this inquiry, there was like a culture or language barrier that were preventing me from understanding what those traditions were getting at. So he really was like a Rosetta Stone for me, opened up all kinds of doors. And, some people like to bag on him, but others idolize him. And I don't do either.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that was
Yeah,
my
to idolize him almost misses some of his own points, right?
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, he's such a character. It's hard not to be
Yeah.
enamored of him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh, but anyway, that was kind of a Rosetta Stone moment where it led to all new kinds of pathways of
Mm-hmm.
inquiry.
Yeah,
And
because the I guess one hazard, so if let's just try to put ourselves into where you were. So first, it's almost like the whole story has this very um, strong bullet in the middle, which is the collapse of self, and then
yeah,
walking away disoriented from that. It's like, who can help me?
Yeah.
And you can, if you're anyone in that position, I mean, that's when you might wander into one of these spiritual traditions that goes on for many years, and
Yeah.
is very prescriptive, and so it's almost fortunate to just that you found what you found. I mean, maybe if you did find one of those other paths, it wouldn't have been appealing for another reason. But
I,
it's a vulnerable position, not necessarily for you, but just anybody in general.
yeah.
Once you get insight, you're trying to get your bearings somehow, and the ways to get those bearings are different, and some might be have this little tilt to them that just doesn't feel quite right. So
Yeah. And I guess and right, no two journeys are ever going to look exactly alike. I again, maybe it's just luck or um reflects on my character, but I really was having a lot of fun at this point. I
mm,
was not being serious. Because again, I suddenly there was not that self-construct that needed defense or justification. Um, I was, at least still had plenty of income at that point. I wasn't married. I was single. I didn't have kids, and so I really could goof off, and I did. I had a lot of fun. I lived downtown. I commuted to work by skateboard when I worked there, and yeah, just go hang out in breweries. It was
mm,
like I really was not being serious. And I think that's part of why Watts immediately deeply resonated because he wasn't terrible. He
mm,
wasn't serious at all.
mm,
He was
mm,
sincere, and he was a rascal.
mm,
I'm a bit of a rascal,
mm,
or a fair bit of a
mm,
rascal.
mm,
Just, I'm not a jerk, and so there was that playfulness and a lack of seriousness that I don't think I would have been a shoe-in for a Buddhist center. Yeah, I'm not a conformist. I mean, not that that's what they're looking for, but yeah, I could probably err on the side of irreverence.
mm.
And I'd spent more than 30 years of my life in devout religion.
Yes, right.
And so to be free of that, yeah,
Yeah, no going back.
yeah, allow me to blow off some steam. I spent my late teens and early 20s with my nose in a book, working my ass off to get degrees. I never partied once in
Mm,
college.
mm,
I mean, I struggled and struggled to graduate, get my degree and get to work. I never played around. I never goofed off. And people think, yeah, go to college, it's party time. No, no, I was working 80, 100 hours a week in my coursework, perhaps because I'm just thick. I don't know. But yeah, like I was pretty straight-laced as a young person. And so going through all this, yeah, I wasn't looking to get into a tradition, to get into a rigorous spiritual practice. And so yeah, Watts had that kind of a bit of an irreverent streak too.
mm.
So
So
maybe
Watts,
that's what kept me out of the conventional options.
mhm. And so once you had your Watts is sort of a connected in the right way, you said that led to other, using him, it was sort of spidered into other
Exactly. And
resources, people.
yeah, so it was like a spiritual buffet,
Hmm,
like
hmm,
what do you try a bit of this, try a bit of that. How,
hmm,
what do you want to do? And so the one constant through it all from that very when I was at the library and got all those books, though, the Tao Te Ching never was not salient. It blew my mind the first time I read it, and to this day I still read it regularly.
mm,
It's endless in meaning, and if I ever actually get to retire, I would love to learn Chinese so I can actually start working on trying to understand the text directly
hmm.
as opposed to using English translators as intermediaries. That was always there. But yeah, there in Taoism, like especially Chuanzi, there's some humor there too, and they're not overly serious about things, and they're very fluid. So that has always been, inspiring for me. Uh, and I I think it was then when Sam Harris released the book Waking Up, and I read that, and that gave me some new clues as to lines of inquiry. And but a lot of his came from very traditional backgrounds as well. So I, had to do a little bit of reading and digging to figure out what all these different traditions were, and then kind of figured out they didn't sound like my cup of tea to be like going on formal retreats.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I just kind of dabbled, and then a different chapter in my life opened. When I met who's now my new wife, and we had all kinds of adventures together, and so I actually just was so busy that a lot of the lines of inquiry were not available.
Mm-hmm.
And admittedly, it's because we were going out and exploring things and having adventures and
Mm-hmm.
just enjoying life,
Mm-hmm.
really. And it wouldn't be for another couple of years before we actually settled down, bought a place, and started our homesteading efforts, where I was actually in one place for a protracted period of time and working on one project, which was homesteading. And with that much more narrowed focus in life, it was shortly after that that Sam Harris launched the Waking Up app. And I jumped on that as soon as it was in its first commercial release. And his content, he brought in all sorts of collaborators. And I dove into those meditations, very deeply and very intently. And that began another chapter of actual intense self-inquiry. I had the luxury of living in complete ignorance as to my nature and the nature of reality, but was so lucky to have life unfolding in a way that actually let me spend a couple of years just living life and
Mm-hmm.
enjoying it. And they're not that there weren't struggles, but they were manageable struggles. I guess we can put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there's many chapters in the book
Yeah.
of life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're hitting on some of the certainly the bigger elements, because this almost sounds like we're, not that there's a quote unquote finish line, but well, I guess there might be, depending upon how you define it, and defining it, of course, gets a little tricky. And is definitions, are they understood the same way? Because I think we acknowledge up front, and through every moment of this conversation, some parts of this are trying to define the undefinable, even though that sounds silly.
Yeah.
But I guess what I'm saying is, this did culminate in a resolve for you
Hmm.
in some sort of lasting, enduring way. And
Yeah.
it sounds like we're, with the Waking Up app, and now this more serious, once again, like serious intentional inquiry is back in your life.
Hmm.
So this is, would you say, the last leg of getting into that resolution?
Oh, I guess it depends how you count legs, but
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
getting there.
Yep. Yep.
Yes, I like to say there is a culmination in the inquiry that can resolve, uh, but life doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So even if you get to the bottom of things, the nature of reality, the nature of what you are, you can. And that's another point where traditions and I really butt heads. And I'm emphatic, like, no, you can actually get to the bottom of this, where there is that threshold crossing. Now, when you cross that threshold, it doesn't matter. Life still goes on the same as it always has. Your friends are who they are, your families is who they are, your communities who they are, your societies who they are, the global civilization's what it is. Economics work the way they do, politics works the way they do. None of that's changed. So life always goes on. There's no resolution to life, but the inquiry side of thing can have a resolution. And that was a very, very circuitous journey. Yeah, the collaborators and contributors to the Waking Up app definitely were key in that. It's its own story. I don't know what, if any, detail we want to get into on that are. Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
that's me.
I'm tiptoeing around how to ask these questions as to not confuse both of us or anybody else listening to this. But when is there a way you feel comfortable describing that culmination? I mean, is does non-duality do it for you, or if not that, is there? And you feel free to reject this exercise outright, because I don't think either of us want to get too far into territory that might just sound weird. But is so taking a step back,
Yeah.
that sort of if you use the word culmination of understanding reality, is there a way you feel comfortable describing that?
Ooh, it's a tricky one for sure. I usually wouldn't talk about it in terms that I would say, here's a blanket statement for public consumption,
Mm-hmm.
but this is going to be for public consumption. That's
Mm-hmm.
okay. We'll take a
Mm-hmm.
stab at it. Normally, I'm in one-on-one conversations with people. And so knowing who I'm speaking with, I can be a little more intentional because it literally is ineffable. And so we're painting pictures with words, we're making hints, we're using metaphor, simile. Um,
Which
so
is, just to point out too, this is also what all these folks in the Waking Up app are doing. This is what
yeah,
all these names we've listed, they're doing the same thing.
yeah,
But please go on. So I don't want
sure.
to make it sound, we're painting, all of these are attempts. All of these are
Yeah.
attempts.
Well, the way I typically frame it might be at odds with some of the things published on your website. You've
Mm-hmm.
discussed brain constraints, for
Mm-hmm.
instance, and but you just said non-duality. So the brain constraint is kind of a dualistic model of how we would describe reality. You could have an objective reality and a subjective observer, for instance. So, I mean, there's no harm in talking about things that way. Uh, I like working with whatever assumptions and worldviews someone else brings to the table. So if someone's like really sold on dualism, but that's fine. We can work that. Non-duality is certainly an option. Um, and I think it's a better conception, a better model. But again, any way you articulate it is conceptual, and reality isn't a concept, and you are not a concept. So they're going to fall short. They're going to be clunky in ways. Um, excuse me. So um, I guess I'd say the inquiry into self and the inquiry into the nature of self and the inquiry into the nature of reality come together. They
Mm-hmm.
converge.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, they're not two lines of inquiry anymore. So when you get to the bottom, excuse me, perfect time to uh, get choked up. No. Um, when we uh, get to the bottom of what reality is, if I can phrase it that way.
Mm-hmm.
That's the same thing as getting to the bottom of what you are.
Mm-hmm.
And what it is at bottom has been called all kinds of things. You've heard them, everybody's heard all these fantastic terms for what's at bottom. And it could be called Brahman, it could be called Buddha nature, it could be called Tao, it could be called God. Um, and one of my favorite commentators on this is a guy named John Wheeler. He used the term fundamental nature. So basically, like Buddha nature, but we're pulling it out of a tradition and just calling it fundamental nature. Not a really poetic label, but they're all labels. That's all. And so when that becomes clear what the label is indicating, it's possible for that clarity to really click to a degree where it can't be missed any longer,
Mm.
because it's always been the case. It's what's here right now, and it's never not been that way and cannot be any other way. But it's too fundamental. It's like works in the opposite direction, if I can phrase it that way, as discursive thought. As conceptual thinking works, that's all about breaking things apart and classifying and categorizing. And this is more like integrating till you can get back to the most fundamental thing.
Mhm.
Um, and it isn't a thing. That's the problem. It's not an object. It's nothing you can point at. Um, and
It's yeah. I mean,
yeah, I was just gonna say it's
it's everything.
yeah, yeah, exactly. It literally is everything. And so Alan Watts liked to offer then, therefore it's literally true to say it doesn't make a difference. So then it's hard to, you realize you can't talk about something that doesn't make a difference, but it's the fact that there's anything at all in the first place.
Mm.
That's, yeah, that's where talking about it gets really, really difficult. Um, and so I don't like making general blanket
Yeah,
statements
well, I think
because
you've done your best, and both of us are trying to put some uh, warnings on this part of the conversation that this may never make sense to people understanding it in this particular way that we're talking about it right now, but perhaps it'll click for them in some other way. I think maybe without trying to put any exactness on this, which isn't quite possible, the point is that in that line of inquiry started with self, and then the inquiry in self eventually connects with the what is reality, like who am
yeah,
I and what is reality come
yeah,
together,
exactly.
and that coming together was where you felt your resolution.
Yes, and right, in a Hindu tradition, they'd say talk about the unity of Atman and Brahman,
Mm.
and they're not separate. Again, and that's what non-dual is all about. Is we in a phrase Alan Watts and others have used is distinctions without difference.
Mm-hmm.
So it's differentiated, but it's not separated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, the fundamental fact that there even is experience or is awareness or is existence or is reality, that's, if you will, the magic. And it is magic.
Mm-hmm.
It's really inexplicable. And uh yeah, yeah, I'm sorry. It's
No,
so hard to talk about.
yeah, I think the um, as you said, life goes on and
Yeah,
things are
life
the way
does go
they
on.
are. What we're both trying to do the best we can is just marking sort of the tail end of this 11-year period and how that felt.
Yeah.
And I think we've done about as good of a job as we can.
Yeah. And
And
again, that 11 years was like the Christianity side of it.
oh
And
yeah,
then
sorry.
another 8.5. So it's actually all
Sure.
told about 20 years.
Sure, 20 years. So 20 years. The 11 was the exploration out of faith, and
Right.
then the back end of that was everything we're talking about now.
Yes. Yeah. And once it came into focus, it was also like that disillusion of the concept of the self image being seen to be utterly insubstantial. It what you're left with is ineffable,
Hmm.
but it's right here. It's totally obvious, and the world goes on as it
Hmm.
always had. So when you realize the light of the fundamental, the magic that is everything, and that's what you are, and that's what reality is, but it's still coming on
Hmm.
exactly the same as it always has. So we're
Yeah.
still left
Once
with,
again, I'll throw in chop wood, carry water, and I
yeah,
didn't explain
yeah.
what that meant earlier, but it's just like, what do you do in light
What
of
do you
these
do?
discoveries? Well, you just go on about your
Yeah,
life.
exactly.
Now, the thing about chopping wood and carrying water is you're sort of your worldview is just shifted now. You know,
Yes.
you're not propelled by quite the same energy you might have been in the
Yes.
past. So yes, chop wood, carry water,
Right.
but your fuel is a little different at this point.
Right. As instead of having, say, a hard objective goal, something you can measure that, like, this is what's going to give my life significance and meaning, it becomes much more, as Alan Watts liked to say, uh, what's the point of a dance? The point of a dance is to dance. The
Hmm.
point of music is music. And so it becomes very playful, becomes very
Yeah,
alive.
you're not waiting
Dynamic.
for the big return on your investment, right? You
Right,
because
right. No,
the return
I,
is every moment.
right, right. No, I also tried the return and then that blew up.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
like, oh, well, that didn't do me any good. So
Hmm. Hmm.
now what? Okay. But the thing is, right, no, like me leaving my career, the reason I did was it wasn't what was right for me. It
Hmm.
wasn't what I wanted to do.
Hmm.
And so that really, again, someone asked John Wheeler at one point, again, the spiritual teacher, not the physicist, when he finally got it, like the click, that threshold crossed, and it's like it's just this. He's like, what do I do with that?
Yeah, yeah.
And John Wheeler just said, whatever you want.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like, what do you want to
Yeah, it
do?
is. It is when you've been habitually going through life, needing sort of even if it's a dim one, some sort of goal. You know,
Yeah,
all of this is in service of what? Well, something that what is, you know, maybe comprised of several things for people, and it always seems to be around the corner. And when you do
yeah,
obtain one thing, maybe there's a new thing around the next corner. And you know, this these series of insights that you and I are talking about tends to quiet all of that. And
yeah,
then because that you know you spent potentially decades in that habitual mode, it's very weird to when it all goes silent.
yeah.
And then the big question, I guess, you know, I've experienced this and I've heard you say it, allude to it here, is what now? What now?
Well,
And it takes a second to just sit with that and sort of, you know,
yeah.
be at
And
peace
there's
with it.
no one can tell you the answer.
Hmm.
It's like that's something you've got to figure out for yourself. Again, I've just been really lucky, I guess you could say blessed, to be able to live a life where I could steer the ship early enough that when that final threshold well, at each of these key points, I was already, hands on the rudder and like trying to figure out what I was doing anyway. And when that final inquiry insight clicked, it didn't change it. I was already on course, even though, life has ups and downs and all
Hmm.
the vagaries, and it didn't change anything. It's like, oh, well, I'm doing what I want to do. I guess I'll just keep doing
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
But yeah, our whole goal back in when we first started homesteading, we used the phrase living for a living. Like that's what we were doing.
Hmm.
We just wanted to live. And there's nothing fancy. We're not no longer trying to change the world, though if the opportunity presents itself to have a positive impact,
Yeah, Wu Wei comes to
hey,
mind from, I know that's independent of Alan Watts, but Alan Watts is the one who introduced that concept to me. Wu Wei, just going with the flow of life. And like you
yes,
said, if opportunities present themselves, go with them. But
exactly.
if it
I
feels like
and
you're pushing against the current of a river, something might be off there.
right, you can and exactly. You if you want to swim against the current, you can try, but I don't know. It just doesn't make any sense to me. You're already in the current. So now if you want to go one side or the other, go right ahead, but don't swim against it. Like that's ridiculous.
Mhm.
And so yeah, we knew we wanted a lifestyle of a certain kind, and so we just started making changes that would give us the opportunity to go in that direction. And yeah, and then you're just
And
going
what
along.
what I really like that you pointed out is, we alluded to this final click, and I think we've done enough trying to define that and then backing away from it. But there was
Yeah.
a point where, the questions just made sense, and
Yeah.
that was not a prerequisite to start living life the way that felt more in tune and
Exact.
with the
Yeah.
earlier insights, right? And
Yeah.
and I think that would be important for anybody who's somehow entangled in these things we're talking about, is because what I've
Right.
noticed is that people do really get wrapped around the axle of, did I have the final click yet? Is it like this? Did I get it yet? And you can, and total sympathy for that situation. You're trying to understand, you know, people are talking in various ways about this final thing. Did I
Yeah.
do it yet? Did I do it yet? But what we've acknowledged, even in your story, is that that was not necessary for some of these earlier insights to start really adding value and,
Yeah.
you know, giving your life a direction that just felt really nice.
Exactly. And it's been neat that a lot of the people I've been in conversation with over the past few years have asked me vocational questions. And I'm like, great. Yeah, no. And with the same disclaimer, always don't do what I did unless you really want to. But um, the problem if that you may be looking at a career choice, that's going to be there no matter what. And so you just need to address that and don't worry about the this inquiry question. It's like it's not going they're parallel projects, I guess you
Hmm.
could call them. They're
Yeah,
concurrent efforts.
yeah. Not that you would want to say never worry about it, and
Right.
but you could almost say that, right? You could almost say just forget that finish line, if there is
Yeah.
such a thing. It seems to me that, kind of backing up to the halfway point, the illusion of self, and again, we acknowledged earlier that the illusion of self, there's a lot of inroads to that.
Hmm.
That seems like a very powerful one because you're really, and it's not doing this necessarily. It's sort of being with the process. But when the construct of self begins to show itself for what it is,
Yeah.
that just leads to different attitudes towards things. It's almost like you can't help but approach and think about everything differently from that point.
Yeah. Yeah. You've eliminated a lot of the noise in
Mm-hmm.
life.
Mm-hmm.
And but the life project goes on.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's you whether or not you've crossed that threshold we've mentioned, you still have to figure out where you're going to live.
Mm-hmm.
Where's money coming from? How are you paying taxes? How are you going to vote? What kind of consumer do you want to be? There's
Which,
all these questions have to be answered regardless of the inquiry.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And
There's never,
that does get a little bit to sort of the, you know, you mentioned it earlier, selfinvestigation.org. There's sort of two legs to it, broadly speaking. The first leg is doing what we're doing right now, just sort of appreciating, hey, I had this experience. How was yours? How do these
yeah,
things feel to everybody? And I think that's a fun project.
it
And
is.
and then, if there's some community around that project, what you can then do is talk about these more, just life things.
Yeah.
Whether it's things happening in the world, or how one might make certain decisions in life informed by some of these other things we're talking about. That seems like project number two.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
because as we've acknowledged a few times now, life goes on.
Yeah. Yep. And and that those questions and those problems, they're just guaranteed and they're always going to be there. So yeah, there's never a wrong time to be thinking about them and working on them. But as you said earlier, this perspective shift that inquiry can provide can reduce the angst and the anxiety that may be going along with those life project efforts. So
Hmm.
that's nice.
Hmm.
Um, if one wants to go down that road, there's definitely some perks to be gathered along the way, though it might take a little bit of effort to
Hmm.
get there.
Hmm. I'm I think what we've done without even really trying to do it is I mean we knew it was the goal today to hear your story, and as you know I have maybe 25 questions, and I think we've hit a lot of them without even trying to. But so the go ahead.
Oh, I was just no. I said
Okay.
cool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
way to
No,
go.
no, yes, that's great that we did that. And so before, because what I'll do is maybe scan down and we'll just do some for fun
Oh,
conversations. But
sure.
but it also feels like um, we're we're at this point where um, the 20-year journey concluded, and but life has gone on since then. So is
Yeah.
how do you characterize that? How
Well, oh yeah. Yeah, yeah. Well, if you can't tell, I love John Wheeler.
Mhm.
His work's just stunning. And I remember a conversation where he talked about the nature of a question. And so the spiritual seeker, someone who's really deep into inquiry, has a question. And he said, well, think about how questions work. And what is the payoff, the real payoff when a question is answered? And you might think about it a few different ways. He'd argue the real payoff is the question falls away. That's it. That's
Mhm.
like the biggest reward, if you will, from getting a question answered is the question ceases to be there. And so that's what that threshold was like is it wasn't that fundamental we were pointing at. You can't say what it is. I can't describe it adequately. And even if you know where to look, when you do in your own inquiry, itself is completely mysterious. It's I said to another friend recently, like you can't ever find it like an object. It's impossible. What you find is what it does. Its activity, its energy. That's what you can find. And that is the proof that it's there doing what it's doing. And that's kind of its own sidebar spiritual conversation, which we don't need to get into here. But the idea when that question is answered, what am I? And you're like, that, even though you can't actually point at it and say what it is, the question falls away. And so there's that again, that mental bandwidth occupied with the seeking journey and the questioning, and it just lets go. And now life continues.
Mhm.
And so there's it, but there's not a pressure, there's not a burden or a burning in those same ways. And you're free
Yeah,
to simply
dissatisfaction,
address
right?
life.
Yeah. Um, that makes a lot of sense. And, that is, in a way, there's a couple more things we can talk about, and we should for
Sure.
fun. But in a
Sure.
way, that was sort of all there is to talk about, right? For you and your experience. Because once that happened, in terms of your story, and how this played out for you, that really was sort of the end scene in terms of inquiry.
Yeah, yeah, it's liberation.
Mm-hmm.
Liberation is the freedom from having the question,
Mm-hmm.
feeling like it needs to be answered, that
Mm-hmm.
you're losing out on something or missing something. No.
Mm-hmm.
How is everything lacking anything?
Mm-hmm.
And so you can relax and just the ease of existence. And even when things get shitty, frankly, it's like, okay, that's just the way things are going. And that is part of, the ebb and flow of life. And so then you can attend to the shittiness when it happens with full vigor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I feel like that's one chapter of this conversation. We'll throw one more in here too, but that's really cool to hear your story again for so many reasons. And so thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks for sharing
absolutely.
that.
Oh, it's great fun to have these conversations.
Hmm.